Hey guys, welcome to yet another episode of On Thy Audience. I am Pravya Praveen, product marketer at Isoto, and today we have with us Abhishek Daddo, co-founder and CEO of FuSense. Hey Abhishek, it's good to have you on the show.
Hey Pravya, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Right. While a lot of readers go ahead and subscribe to content, be it premeditated purchase or an impulsive purchase, right? A lot of readers never subscribe. And a recent study by Deloitte showed that 47% of US consumers are put off by the increasing number of subscription services. Many publishers out there are jumping into the subscription bandwagon due to the dwindling reliability of ads, right? But how can one encourage readers to subscribe and monetize their audience? Abhishek will talk about this and a lot more. So let's start off with this, right? Why FuSense, Abhishek? Why the name? What led you to start off with it?
So this journey started pre-COVID, right before COVID hit, and with a particular publisher which was asking me for $18 for one piece of content. So I love tech news. So it's a tech website. And I said to myself, I'm not going to pay $18 for one piece of content. And their subscription was $20. So clearly, their intent was not that somebody will purchase one article. It was more as an anchor so that I would buy their subscription. But the problem that I inherently faced at that point of decision making was I already have many subscriptions. My friend has sent me this link and I want to read it because it's coming from a referred source. But I just want to read and move on. I'm not going to be subscribing, especially because I haven't built that relationship with that site so far. Right? And even if I could afford yet another subscription, the fact that I have to commit to a monthly subscription and the pain it will take for me to unsubscribe if I were to choose to, just prohibited me at that time from subscribing. I just shut the browser window. And increasingly, as COVID came about, I found myself hitting this subscription more and more. So you said clearly that, the reason why subscriptions are becoming so popular is not because, everybody is writing very good content, but it is because ad revenues are not working in the same way it used to. The instinctive thought I had was that why can't I just pay a few cents for this article and read and move on? And, domain selection, that's not really an art. It is the easier it is for somebody to understand what you do, the better it is. And luckily enough, I registered a domain fusense.co right then and there. Right. And that's how the name came about.
The New York Times, right, is like a gold standard for building a digital subscription first business. But again, not everyone is New York Times. Subscriptions are important, sure. But not every publisher is ready for building a subscription offering. What should, let's say, mid-size and small publishers do to get more subscriptions?
See, subscriptions has two parts. One is the audience and the other is the content, right? If you can marry the audience with your content and build a loyal, highly engaged, high frequency, high recency audience for your content, then subscription makes sense for that audience. But if any of these things are missing, whether it is recency or frequency, or the fact that the user has some subscription already, right? So who will become a subscriber? Somebody who is recent, who is frequent, and at the same time he doesn't have other subscriptions. So the missing link is that most publishers don't know what other subscriptions will that user already have. So even if recency and frequency and engagement, all those metrics are working, you can show subscriptions many, many times, but still the user will not subscribe because you don't know this missing link. Where else is this user already subscribed? So To build that sort of dating period between the user and the publication, it requires baby steps. It requires the user to get comfortable with making small payments for that content and eventually decide that, look, I am going to unsubscribe somewhere because I have really started liking this, and then subscribe to this one, right? So this is the key missing link that most publishers miss out, right? We have spoken to many user journey management software providers, and the score, which is propensity to subscribe, seems to be very high for this user segment, and yet you have shown subscription 12 times in 1 month. The user has visited your website 12 times, you've shown subscription 12 times, and yet the user is not subscribing. Clearly means that there is some data point missing in your algorithm. And unfortunately, nobody can find out where else is the user subscribing, right? So the small payment option becomes really valuable for that user. He is or she is frequent enough to pay a small amount if it is very simple to pay, but they are still not ready to get into a commitment.
Agreed. Like you just said, right? Sometimes people have subscribed to a lot of websites, right? Even there's a study done, the DNR 2021. The median number of subscriptions held by those who pay for news was consistently one. So that's tricky, right?
Right.
Which makes it difficult for publishers to get hold of them, get hold of the same person to say. Keeping this in mind, right?
Right.
How should one build a subscriber funnel?
So the typical journey in a subscriber funnel looks like this. When a user first comes to a website or an app, let's say you don't know anything about this user. At this point, it is just an IP address. You start to know something about that user for the first time when you drop your first party cookie, so that you know that this is the same user who's coming again. So you start to build some rapport, some history with that user. The next phase is that you want to give that user, it's still unknown, you don't know exactly who this user is, their email or name, you don't know their persona, but what you do know is that they are starting to consume some metered content. So you give the first few pieces of content for free, and then boom, you start to show an all you can eat subscription offer, right? This is the moment of truth, where you now don't know if this user has subscribed elsewhere, right? Some advanced publishers will then extend this funnel to say that, okay, an all you can eat buffet style subscription is not what this user is buying. Maybe I can simply show a registration without having the user to pay anything. So that's when the branching starts further. Let's say the user has registered, then the publisher will start showing you some smaller offers. And these are really highly sophisticated publishers, right? Normal medium publishers will not even get to this level of algorithm. That, okay, this user has consumed 4 metered articles for sports. So maybe I should offer only a sports bundle to this user. Or some publishers will start discounting the price of their subscription. So various strategies and various paths in the user journey start to happen, right? You show discounting offers, you show micro bundles, if you were to call it, and yet the user does not subscribe with you, right? So then you can introduce maybe unbundling type options. So you can say, hey, why don't you tip for the author? Right? So you start to go deeper. Is the user going after the author, or is the user still at a genre level, still likes this content?
That's interesting.
Or you can say, why don't you pay per content? Right? So experiment with that. Some publishers can at this stage also start doing context-based advertising, so affiliate e-commerce based revenue streams can start to come in. Because if a user is coming on sports content, maybe showing a cricket bat or showing an e-commerce item is valuable to the user. So those are all unbundling strategies to build loyalty for the user. So after you have tried everything under the sun to get the user to commit in a small amount or a big amount subscription, a small package or a big package, if all of that fails, then you start to show unbundling strategies to the user so that the user starts to date you at this point. Right now, they're starting to take smaller bites, and then they can come back into your real subscription funnel at some stage. They might never get there, or they might, but at the least, you have not lost that user. Right.
Right.
So most publishers, the more sophisticated you are, the more extensions you have in the user journey.
Got it. I'm pretty sure, right? Even with all this effort going on, there might be people who never subscribe, right? Who
Yeah.
are these never subscribers, and how do you think subscriptions can be encouraged out of them?
So there is a certain audience that will just find lower quality but free news, right? So in principle, they are not in agreement with payment for content,
Right.
right? And that's the audience where uh, direct payment led strategy will just not work. So that's the audience where context based advertising or simply display advertising is probably the best option, right? And roughly that is 40-45% of global audiences who will just never pay.
Wow.
Now that number is decreasing, but still there's a significant portion of people who will just never pay. Then there are people who will pay something, and then there are very few people who will buy the full subscription. So there's a whole range. So the idea is not to convert that 40% into a subscriber. The idea is within that 60% remaining pool, how do you graduate somebody who is paying a small amount into a bigger amount and to commit to a monthly payment?
Okay, so basically you're telling we need to focus more on the people who actually are willing to spend some money.
Right.
Right.
So, marketing has a role to play, right? If the marketing team has a page views KPI, then obviously you are getting everybody on the kitchen sink to your website. But if your marketing metric is conversion into a registration, so how many registrations per 1,000 page views? If that is the KPI that the marketing team is living by, then automatically you start to see the right quality audience come to your website. And then that 60% number starts to become 70% and 80%. Right. So it starts there. A lot of it is internal publisher goals alignment.
Right. You also previously mentioned that the pandemic actually spurted the subscription growth, right? But then nowadays, there is a slight decline. How should publishers make sure that the never subscribers retain and then do not churn?
Right. So, what happened in pandemic, all websites saw a spike in their traffic.
Right.
And just because there was a 10%, let's say a 10x increase in traffic, doesn't mean that there was a 10x increase in subscriptions. So a 10x increase in traffic maybe resulted in doubling subscriptions. So essentially cost increased 10x because you're serving your website to 10x more people, but your subscription only grew 2 times. Even so, that increase is quite large and quite substantial. Now, that is a pandemic phenomenon where people were stuck at home.
True.
Now, as people start to move out again, their engagement rate with that website starts to fall off again. So during pandemic, they were engaging, let's say 15, 20 times with that website, especially because they have subscribed. Now they have to go to that website because they don't want to feel buyer's remorse, which happens in every subscription product. You always think, do I really need this? Am I really consuming enough for it to be worth $10 or $5 a month? So when that engagement rate starts to drop, it is obvious that churn will happen.
Yeah.
Right. So even for a very large publisher like Wall Street Journal, the average engagement rate for a subscriber is less than 5 times a month. That's public data.
Oh, okay.
Right. So what that means is that even in the subscriber pool that exists today with most publishers, there are many called sleepers within that subscriber pool. Now, these sleepers, they just need any trigger to unsubscribe. The trigger could be they found a better place where they could be more engaged, or it's simply as a credit card bill, which comes that, oh no, I still haven't unsubscribed,
Right.
and that reminds them that they have to unsubscribe. So those sleepers are the critical part, which most subscription business try to convert into more engaged readers, right? And if the engagement rate crosses 10, 12 times a month, then that subscriber will sustain. But if that engagement rate is less and you're not able to get that up, then it is obvious that this user is about to churn, right? So churn is inevitable for most publishers. It can go as high as 20% of subscribers churning every month,
Okay.
right? So, it's an inevitable truth. And the only thing that publishers should be focused on is engagement at that point.
Got it. Sachetizing payments might help get one incremental revenue, definitely, right? But what if publishers are losing out on the opportunity to get better revenue? What if someone is willing to pay more?
Yeah, so that is the whole point of segmentation.
Okay.
Right? You only show the sachet option as the last resort.
Makes sense.
Upfront, you have tried everything to get the user to subscribe with you, whether it's an all-you-can-eat offer or micro bundles or discounted offers, etc. When all of that fails, that's when unbundling starts.
Okay.
Right? So unbundling is the byproduct. It's not maybe the main goal of the publisher. So clearly, when you start showing unbundling offers to that user, you have saturated everything that could happen before, right? To convert that user to a real subscriber. Now, the reality is that I call it a byproduct, but the truth is that 98% of the audience will fall into that bucket. That you have tried everything under the sun to get them to subscribe or to take your micro offer or small bundle offer, but then they still skip that. They defy that registration wall at that point, right? So then the only option is unbundling. The other option is you bring them back at the beginning of the journey and put them again as a new user, but that's pointless. Right? Because then you're again giving them metered content, etc., to see the same results again. Because remember, you don't know if this user who looks like a subscriber might have subscribed somewhere else already. So clearly, he's technically a never subscriber. You just don't know it. So it's all about being able to extend the user journey into unbundling options, make it smaller and smaller, and get to a sachet size. So that way you don't cannibalize the real users who are loyal to you, high recency, high frequency, and they don't have any other subscriptions. That's when they can turn into a subscriber. But if you miss that boat, then you extend the journey into smaller sachets.
Interesting. Like you also spoke, right? Marketing plays an important role, especially what their end goals are. Because in the end of the day, right, almost everyone has quality content, right? But then it's about marketing it, which is like ship in the harbor situation if you don't do it. How can marketing play a role to increase the subscriptions? What should they do?
See, I think marketing just running off in a silo and an editor coming to say to the marketing team and saying that, oh, this content is really great, right? Let's market it, is probably not the best approach these days, right? It has to be data led in marketing. So at Few Cents, typically what we do is we provide our publishers data saying that, hey, this content is getting unlocked at a very high rate and it's getting enough page views, meaning that this is a clear trigger to the marketing team that people value this content. So please market it more aggressively, right? Or there could be content which has really high unlock rate, with few cents, but the page views are less. That means that content is being under marketed. So then clearly people value this content. They're even willing to pay for it in small sachets. So you might as well market it more, right? On the flip side, there could be content which has a lot of page views coming in already, and then nobody is actually willing to pay for it, right? In that sachet model. That just means that marketing need not, if they are focusing on that content to drive audiences, they should reduce the burn for marketing that content. So, data driven marketing is super important, and it almost has to be real time and plugged into your marketing engine, right? So user engagement data has to be plugged into your marketing engine, so that it can be automated to an extent as well.
Got it. AI has been and is the buzzword, right? How can AI help along this journey?
See, artificial intelligence is it's a good buzzword to have, but it requires streams and streams of data, stored in a structured manner, um, with hypothesis that if this happens, this should happen. So if your data is stored in a structured manner where you can build such hypotheses that if this, then this, it's almost predicting what can happen next, depends on historic data, tons and tons of historic data. So if you don't have that kind of data sitting with you at a user level, a granular user level, for every engagement the user makes with you, then you really cannot get into AI. And I always think about companies that say that, hey, we are an AI company. Go out, like really young companies say that I have AI models, etc. I often wonder that, is it that they are going to build that AI algorithm, right? That predictive model based on the data that I'm going to provide them, or they already have that, right? The point being that you need a lot of data, predecessor data, to be able to say that, hey, this is what's going to happen next, right? So the ability to predict what can happen next, if all of these scenarios have happened before, is what the simplest form of AI could be, right? But most publishers don't even capture and store whatever data they have in user data in a structured format to begin with.
Right.
So AI as a journey has to be thought through seriously, and it needs management buy-in from the top, and a fair bit of time investment upfront for it to see results.
Agreed. Right. So better predictions, gathering all the data is super important.
Yeah, I think it all starts with structured data, right? It can really change the fortunes of companies, publishers specifically, if done right. So, even predicting, I was talking about this fork, right, in the user journey, that somebody has not purchased an all you can eat subscription. Now, maybe I should reduce the price of that subscription, but how much do you reduce the price by? Right? You can do it arbitrarily. Let's cut it, discount it by 50%. Let's make it $1 a month. Or it could be done more scientifically based on, the price elasticity of that audience segment, right? And if you have calculated that price elasticity based on data, then you can say that, hey, a 10% decrease in price will give me a 20% increase in subscription rates, right? So it is, at the edge. How do you make decisions at the edge, right? And how do you do it in real time? Requires a lot of data and training data.
Interesting. Okay, let's talk about payment gateway terms, right? It's pretty tricky trying to choose the right one. What are the important things that publisher need to look at when it comes to choosing one?
It's funny. I just wrote a blog about this as well, specifically for media companies. What to look for in a payment service provider as a media company, and I distilled that into 4 key areas. Right.
Okay.
The first area is obviously that the user journey that the payment gateway provides to the user of the publisher has to be seamless, right? And that is table stakes. You cannot go wrong in the user journey. Every extra click every extra screen in the checkout journey can lead to massive drop offs in conversion. So this is, if you're doing the user journey part right in payments, then you have a seat at the table, right? Without that, you don't even have a seat at the table. The second thing in digital content space is that audiences are global for most publishers, especially English speaking publishers. Audiences are global from day one. And when you talk about global audiences, not everybody is going to be willing to take out their credit card. So if you go to Indonesia, people want to pay with OVO wallet. In India, the audience wants to pay with Paytm. In US, people want to use Venmo, PayPal. In UK, they want to use PayPal, credit card. So every country has its own payment option. So for a media company, because your audience is global, you have to consider almost an aggregator and not an individual payment service provider. Or you have to integrate with individual payment service providers in every geography. If you're happy in just, let's say you're an Indian publisher and you're happy collecting payments only from your Indian audience, then maybe an Indian payment gateway works just fine. But the moment you think that, hey, I have audiences outside, you need to start thinking about multiple payment options provided. So you need to have multiple integrations, which means that you need to have a very solid tech team to be able to continuously integrate more payment options, right? So diversity of payment options is very important in the media industry specifically because your audiences are global. The third is that if the publisher, if the media is looking at sachetizing, to sachetize payments, you need to be able to accumulate a whole bunch of sacheted payments before you run it through a gateway, because every transaction through a gateway has a fixed cost, right? So to do that, every publisher needs to create sort of a wallet to batch the transactions, right? So a payment service provider that gives a wallet out of the box becomes really important for sachet-based payments, right? Because not all payment service providers provide a wallet solution, right? And the fourth and the most important piece is regulatory, that a payment service provider needs to have the appropriate licenses. So, for example, if somebody is running a wallet-based payment solution in India, they need RBI approval. If they're running it out of Singapore, that wallet needs MAS, which is Monetary Authority of Singapore approval. In US, the authorities are different. In Australia, the authorities are different.
Right.
And to run a wallet, you need to have those licenses in place, else you cannot issue an account to the user, a wallet account to the end user, right? So these are sort of four key elements that I distilled for media companies to look for when they are searching for a payment service provider.
Very good. Abhishek, do you think there is a right time to monetize content with subscriptions? If you could probably name 3 things publishers need to keep in mind while taking the leap.
Corporate will is first and primary, right? I know advertising is a drug, which a lot of publishers are used to. It's a funny story. I was speaking to a publisher once and I was just questioning him about, what are you going to do? What are you planning to do? And to my horror, the answer was that I will just start a new domain because that will just increase my page views, right? So instead of thinking that, hey, I'm going to improve my newsroom, hire better journalists, improve my quality of content, start subscription, which is what I hear most often. But then you hear this answer and that just throws you off your chair. You're like, right. So the first thing is what you need is corporate will, to be willing to invest in quality content production, right? That is sort of step one that you need. Second, what a publisher needs is, and these are all softer elements, right? One is corporate will. The second is alignment of goals within different departments within the publisher. So you have head of subscription revenue, you have head of advertising revenue, and both have opposing KPIs. subscription revenue wants to increase engagement, retention, high quality content. Advertising revenue head wants to increase page views with rubbish content for the most part, right? I hope I'm not being controversial here, but they have opposing goals, right? So what is missing is the head of customer lifetime value in an organization, which looks at that, look, there is an audience for whom advertising works. And then there is a segment for whom subscription works. There is an audience for whom sachets will work. There is an audience for whom context based advertising or affiliate revenues will work, right? So somebody looking at that at a group level, at a it goes beyond the remit of head of subscriptions or head of advertising. So alignment and goals, whether it means that you have to introduce a new sort of role, or everybody understands that everybody is looking at customer lifetime value, and their piece is a part of that. Right. So that is the second most important thing. And third is obviously the tech stack. Right. So after you have corporate will and you have aligned goals, that's when technology can actually come and make a difference. Right. Without that, technology is neither here nor there.
Right. Interesting. We have covered the subscription bit, right?
Yeah.
But what are the other revenue options for various audience segments that publishers definitely need to look at?
See, I think for most quality publishers, events used to be a large revenue stream. Offline events used to be a large revenue stream. That's, maybe coming back in some markets, but the future is probably going to be, digital events.
Right.
It will not have sort of the same pricing or the same margins that offline events had, right? But if publishers keep that option open, that they are willing to invest in online events, platforms, etc. Just because COVID happened, getting rid of that stream is probably not a good idea, right? So diversifying by means of events. The other is publishers. Some of them are starting memberships, which is beyond subscriptions. So, for example, there is other value add services that they provide. For example, a tech startup providing a tech, like Your Story, for example, providing job boards. If you're a member of Your Story, then you get access to Your Story's job board. So it goes beyond the realm of publishing or content production, that they start adding other services, providing mentorship, etc. Right? And I'm talking offbeat options because we all know the standard options, which is advertising, subscriptions, sachets, right? The other option, which I keep talking about, is context-based advertising. So with the demise of third-party cookies, a lot of advertising revenues are now sort of in jeopardy. So context-based, essentially meaning content-based advertising. So if the content is around women's health, then you start to show relevant ads for women's health. So you're moving away from audience targeting and you're now focusing on content-based targeting, right? That is probably the most talked about thing in media circles for advertising, and hence e-commerce affiliate becomes a prominent revenue stream for a lot of publishers, right? So Condé Nast, you must know, is a US-based magazine. With COVID, their sort of physical paper distribution got completely cannibalized, and they've built up a substantial affiliate e-commerce revenue stream today, right? Then you can think about expanding formats. So a traditional publisher who's writing text, now you see people moving into podcasts. We are working with a publisher like Isakal in Bombay, and they have a lot of videos, right, from back in the day, which are just kept in archives. And till date, they haven't figured out a way to monetize it, but why not bring it to the forefront, even if it is archives? So expanding in the types of formats you're producing is another way, right? And then, of course, sponsored content has been around for a while. That's another option.
Pretty good options. Okay. Abhishek, if there was that one North Star metric that publishers need to track, what would that be?
I would say it's engagement per user
Okay.
per month is probably the most important metric. You know, per identifiable ID. So engagement per UUID in technical terms per month is probably the most important metric. And if you are a subscription business, then average revenue per subscriber is also important. Just showing the total number of subscribers is a vanity metric in my mind. You could lose 100,000 subscribers and win 101,000 subscribers in a month. You're still net positive 1,000 subscribers, right? But
Correct.
you have lost 100,000 subscribers who were paying $5 a month, and you have gained 101,000 subscribers paying $1 a month offer. Right?
Great, right?
So you see, the math doesn't stack up if you just take absolute numbers. You always have to have average revenue per subscriber metric if you're a reader revenue business.
Right. Interesting. Okay. Last but not the least, what books are you hooked on to right now? What do you read?
With COVID, I did a fair bit of reading, but what I'm doing right now is I'm more into podcasts than reading books.
Interesting.
Right?
Okay.
So I'm listening to a bunch of Dan Rather these days. I'm listening to a bunch of other sort of political authors, geopolitical authors these days. Trump has a decent podcast as well, by the way.
Oh, wow, okay.
So I'm diversifying myself, right? Screen time is, I'm probably from the older generation. I still like books, but the point is I don't have time to actually pick up a book that much these days.
Okay.
So podcast seems to be the new thing that I'm into.
Right. Pretty much everyone's hooked on to podcasts these days. Right. Abhishek, this has been an amazing session. A lot of insights are packed in just one episode. Thank you so much for taking out the time.
Thanks, Pravya. It was an enjoyable conversation.
Wonderful. I hope you all enjoyed the episode. If you liked what you listened to, don't forget to rate us with a 5-star and share it with your friends. Thanks for tuning in.